Hello and welcome back to another video. It's been a while that I've made a video because my laptop wasn't working and I had to get it repaired. And finally, we are here with another video. So let us get started. I apologize for not uploading video for so long. Okay, now let's get started. It's Secure Synopsis of 15th of June 2021. We're going to cover the entire topics right from 15th of June until today, that is 7th of July, over the period of time. Okay, now let us get started with this. General Studies 1 topic is French Revolution. Explain the impact of the French Revolution on the Spanish colonies in America. So this question is of the world history, and the reference is given here as Mastering Modern World History by Norman Lowe. So they have collected the answer for this question, and we just have to read out and understand a few things here. So the French Revolution basically started from 1789 to 1799. It happened over a period of 10 years where there was a social and political upheaval in France which resulted in overthrow of the monarchy and establishing of the republic by the people and for the people. Now, main causes were multidimensional. Now, let us look at those dimensions. Cultural enlightenment to think rationally critically led to lowering the status of church and monarch, while promotion of secular, scientific, and humanistic values. All this while there was more importance to the church and the Jesuit. Now they started looking at things rationally, and they started understanding that the self realization was actually instant in every individual. They started thinking for themselves, and they started understanding things logically. Social aspiration of the bourgeois class to be politically equally to clergy and aristocratic class. So after the clergy and aristocratic class was the bourgeois, that is the you can compare it with the landlords in India. Now, these guys wanted to have some kind of a political statement for themselves. So that is how it happened. Financial France's involvement in the American Revolution led to, increased taxation at home and reduction in privileges. They started going bankrupt. Political provincial courts opposition to the reduction in their privileges. Economic deregulation of grain prices leading to high inflation of bread, and bad harvest leading to food shortage, provoking the masses to revolt. There is a famous statement here when a normal public reached out to the queen asking for some bread. The queen replied, well, if you do not have bread, why don't you have cake? So that was the kind of mentality of the first lady. And also there was so much of inflation and less amount of food for the population that they had to reach out to the queen. Impact on French society: monarchy was abolished and the republic took its place. Political sovereignty introduced at individual and nation state level with a centralized government. Serfdom, feudalism, slavery were abolished, and the influence of church decreased in personal lives. Idea of separation of public and private realm emerged. The abolition of slavery after the French Revolution was the first move against this repressive system, and Britain followed suit in 1833. So it is the French Revolution that actually gives way to understand how a particular society needs to be governed, and that is how Britain also followed suit in 1833, while the USA banned it in 1865. It led to the destruction of feudalism in France, as all laws of the old feudal regime were repealed and lands of the nobles and church were confiscated and redistributed to the public. The Jacobean constitution, which although never came into effect, was the first genuinely democratic constitution. It gave the right to vote to all, and even the right to insurrection, which implies the right to revolt or rises against the government. Ending the arbitrary rule, the revolution paved the way for rule by law under a constitutional order. Some shortcomings were limited suffrage, especially women were excluded. Slavery was reintroduced by Napoleon. Impact on the world: Napoleon carried ideals of the revolution to the rest of the Europe: liberty, modern laws, democratic rights, protection of private property. This in turn gave rise to the modern nationalism, paving way for creation of the sovereign nation state. Liberalism as government form got crystallized in North and South America. It inspired other revolutions, that is Haitian Revolution, independence movements in Spanish and Portuguese colonies in South America. Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Tipu Sultan in particular, an Indian nationalist freedom struggle, incorporated ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Let's conclude the answer for this question. Thus, the importance of the French Revolution laid in laying the foundation of the modern states in the world. especially the liberal democratic ideals. Also, indirectly, it laid the groundwork for the growth of socialism and communism by providing an intellectual and social environment in which these ideologies could flourish. Let's move on to the next topic, that is general studies 2. Government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. There is a necessity to bring to an end the sedition law on the view that it is used to curb freedom of expression and speech. Discuss. Sedition has been used for quite a long time now. Gandhiji also faced sedition, and a lot of historical figures also faced sedition, which was introduced by the British. Now, how fair is it to still have sedition law in India? Let's have a look at the answer to this question. According to the section 124A of the IPC section, sedition is an act that brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt, or excites or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government established by law in India by words, either spoken or written, or by signs or by visible representation or otherwise. Colonial administrators used sedition to lock up people who criticized the British policies. Recently, a report by Freedom House, Freedom in the World 2021, Democracy Under Siege, downgraded India's status from a free country to partly free country. One of the reasons for the fall is the rise in sedition cases against dissenters. Let's have a look at the background for this section of the IPC. The 124A of the Indian Penal Code is a pre-independence provision introduced by the British government, wherein it covers the sedition charges against the government. Anybody who raises his voice against the government was charged with sedition those days. Various verdicts by Indian judiciary have led to reinterpretation and re-examination of sedition in light of Article 19 of the Constitution. There has been an effort to strike a balance between right to free speech and expression and power of state to impose reasonable restrictions, which is given in Article 19, Clause 2. In 1962, the Supreme Court in Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar upheld Section 124A and held that it struck a correct balance between fundamental rights and the need for public order. Which means the court started understanding that we have given fundamental rights of freedom of speech, of expression. Now, what if an individual or a community starts misusing that freedom of expression to actually abuse a government, abuse an individual in the government, and how can it take things into consideration? So, for this reason, it said the sedition law is required because it gives a correct balance between fundamental rights and the public order. The court had significantly reduced the scope of the sedition law to only those cases where there is incitement to imminent violence towards overthrow of the state, which means the country. Further, the court held that it is not mere against government of the day but institutions as a symbol of a state. Should sedition be scrapped? Now, there are two types of arguments. There are arguments in favor and also those people who are against it. Now, let's have a look at those people who are against it. They say that it is against the democratic norms, which means it stifles the democratic and fundamental right of people to criticize the government. Inadequate capacity of state machinery, the police might not have requisite training to understand the consequences of imposing such a stringent provision. There was a recent ruling by the Supreme Court, which is called as the Shreya Singhal ruling. Now, police in the country are still utilizing that law, which was actually struck down when it comes to the IT law, right? So the police are ill trained or less trained, and they do not understand what has been scrapped and what has been still taking into consideration. So police do not have the requisite training to handle these kind of cases. Possibility of misuse, it has been used arbitrarily to curb dissent. In many cases, the main targets have been writers, journalists, activists who question the government's policy and projects, and political dissenters. The draconian nature of this law, as the crime is non bailable, non cognizable, and punishment can extend for life, it has a strong deterrent effect on dissent even if it is not used. Used to gag press, the press should be protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. Now, there are people who are in favor of this section, and they say that it is not really a draconian law. Now, after the Supreme Court direction, its jurisdiction has been narrowed down. So, why are you making a fuss about it? Application as part of reasonable restrictions, some say, does not really curb free speech. One can use any kind of strong language in criticism of the government without inviting sedition. However, such dissent should not be turned into some kind of persuasion to break the country, which happened in JNU. Bharat Tumhara Tukda Hoga, Tukde Tukde Gang. That is the kind of narrative that was built from the JNU. Threats to unity and integrity of nation due to presence of anti-national elements and divisive forces such as Naxals, separatists who are receiving support from inside and outside the country. Mere misuse cannot be a ground of repeal, rather, provisions should be made where such misuse is eliminated. For example, the very nature of police is they misuse the power that they're being given them. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a police system. Rather, there should be some kind of reforms in the police system. Similarly, there should be some amount of reforms in this law, and it should not be abolished altogether. The guidelines of the Supreme Court must be incorporated in Section 124A as well as by amendment to IPC so that any ambiguity must be removed. Only those actions or words that directly result in the use of violence or incitement to violence should be termed seditious. The state police must be sufficiently guided as to where the section must be imposed and where it must not. For this, there should be requisite training. This needs to include provisions where the government can be penalized if it misuses the section. This will ensure that Section 124A of the IPC strikes a balance between security and smooth functioning of state with the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. Now let's move on to the next topic. Now before that, I can just give an idea, right? Now there should be the government should be penalized if it wrongly inflicts someone in the Sedition Act. There should be a huge amount of fine, for example, about 10 to 20 crores of rupees. Then the government will think twice before putting somebody in jail or putting someone into this law, because the government has to pay taxpayers money of 20 crore if it falls, falls. If it falls, right? The court decides that the government was false, then the government has to pay 20 crore. This kind of penalizing the government might help. The general studies 3, monetary penalization, right? Let's move on to the next topic. Awareness in the fields of IT, space, computers, robotics, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and issues relating to intellectual property rights. The COVID-19 pandemic has put India's space activities into suspension. India has to stay competent enough in order to provide efficient services to its customers. Let's comment. And this article basically appeared in the Financial Express. The COVID-19 pandemic has put India's space activities into suspension. Despite many reforms in space sector undertaken in 2019 and 2020, ISRO's space launch activities have come to a halt. Hit by disruptions due to the coronavirus pandemic, among the major projects that have been affected are Chandrayaan-3 and Gaganyaan, two most ambitious projects of the space active sector in the country. Chandrayaan-3, the third mission to moon, was scheduled later this year. To offset risks and disruption, it should now become a priority for ISRO to pursue pre-launch automation with greater vigor. The current scenario of Indian space sector. India's space activities slowed. India's global share in the total space launches continued to be as low as 1.8%. The three launches from the Sriharikota range took place between November 2020 and Feb 2021, between the first and the second waves of the COVID-19 in India. With a new competition, the satellite customer base that India's commercially successful PSLV enjoyed for 20 years is shrinking considerably. It will take some time for the new startups to make an impact. The first demonstrations from India's space launch startups, Agnikul Cosmos and Skyroot Aerospace, which recently raised about $11 million each in Series A investments, are a few quarters away. Likewise, the first space launch from small satellite launch vehicle built by ISRO and marketed by state-owned New Space India Limited is yet to happen. Space sector scenario across globe. The pandemic has not stopped other launch vehicle developers like the US-based SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, China's Long March, X-Space and OneSpace, or New Zealand's Rocket Lab from testing and providing launch services. Now, what are the measures that is needed? Private companies born during the pandemic must have uninhabited access to space testing infrastructure for quick vehicle development. ISRO must urgently acquire SSLV space proven credentials and make GSLV Mark III Mk3 fit for its human spaceflight missions such as Gaganyaan. Testing and on-field evaluation of reusable space planes for orbital and suborbital flights needs to be accelerated. The reusable launch vehicle, the RLV-TD, ISRO's hypersonic space plane, has been waiting test since 2016. India now has more launch vehicles in testing and operational phases than ever before. It demands a national policy for commercial suborbital, orbital, and interplanetary space in transportation. This requires the Director General of Civil Aviation to expand its ambit into commercial space transportation, as has the US's Federal Aviation Administration. Similar to NASA FAA synergies, the joint DOS DGCA national strategy can help make India's space launch centers and spaceports market oriented and ready for commercial, military, civilian, and experimental space launches. The space launch service providers and space launch technology companies can become partners in this strategy. What's the way forward for India? ISRO will need to identify less labor intensive missions that it can pursue despite the pandemic. ISRO will have to identify missions in the coming weeks and months and adapt itself in pursuing less laborious missions to limit delays and rescheduling, which as of today is not evident. Even in the absence of COVID 19, ISRO was embarked on a roadmap to expand missions both in complexity and numbers, which only underlines why it needs to develop and integrate automation technology in order to at least to reduce, if not outrightly dispense with human labor and intervention at its ground launch stations. Unlike India, countries such as the US enjoy the benefit of a private sector that can meet the requirements of some launch missions amidst a health emergency, limiting the burden on a government driven by space enterprise. Given the foregoing, to offset risks and disruptions, it should now become a priority for ISRO to pursue pre launch automation with greater vigor. Although limited pre launch automation does exist and applied for preparatory tasks by space agencies across the world and the ISRO, it is not extensively developed and used. In the absence of a pandemic as infectious as the current, there would be far less incentive to act with urgency on technology related investments. If anything, COVID 19 may and should lend greater alacrity in pursuing opportunities and incentivizing investments in the AI subfields of machine learning and robotics. Let's move on to the next topic, challenges to internal security through communication networks, role of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges, basics of cybersecurity, money laundering, and its prevention. This is mostly about the security related issues in the country. Discuss ways and means of guarding civilian targets and critical infrastructure against rising cyber attacks in India. Recently, we have seen a number of cyber attacks being planned across the world, especially the United States based companies, government owned companies, water lines, which are being attacked by the suspected Russian cyber criminals. So this can hamper India also because it sees a threat from Chinese. Cybersecurity refers to protecting cyberspace, including critical information infrastructure from attack, damage, misuse, and economic espionage. Cybersecurity is a broad spectrum phase and relates to preventing any form of unauthorized and malafide access to a personal computer, a laptop, a smartphone, or a major network like the national banking system or the railway network or a national information technology asset that also has military implications. Recently, Australia had to stave off its biggest cyber threat with the attack targeting everything from public utilities to education and health infrastructure. India has also been a victim to many such cyber attacks in the past, like WannaCry, Petya ransomware, Mirai botnet, etc. Let's have a look at some of the incidents of cyber attacks across the globe. Several high profile cyber attacks were reported from the United States during the past several months. Towards the end of 2020, for instance, a major cyber attack headlined SolarWinds and believed to have been sponsored from Russia had rocked the US. It involved data breaches across several wings of the US government, including defense, energy, and state. Before the US could even recover from this breach, thousands of US organizations were hacked in early 2021 in an unusually aggressive cyber attack by a Chinese group, Hafnium, which had exploited serious flaws in Microsoft software, thus gaining remote control over affected systems. In quick succession, thereafter, the US has witnessed three more major attacks: an audacious ransomware attack by Russia or East Europe based cyber criminals, styled DarkSide, a colonial pipeline, which is the main supplier of oil to the US East Coast, compelling the company to temporarily shut down operations. Another Russia backed group, Nobilium, next launched a phishing attack on 3,000 email accounts targeting USA and several other organizations. Early this month, JBS SA, the US subsidiary of a Brazilian meat processing company, was the target of a ransomware attack. The company also paid a ransom in millions. Incidents of cyber attacks in India. In India, too, attacks have been happening with increasing frequency. India's national airline, Air India, has said a cyber attack on its data service affected about 4.5 million customers around the world. The breach was first reported to the company in Feb 2021. Nearly 1.16 million cases of cyber attacks were reported in 2020, up nearly three times from 2019 and more than 20 times compared to 2016, according to government data presented in the parliament on Tuesday. On an average, 3,137 cybersecurity related issues were reported every day in 2020. More than 4,000 fraudulent portals emerged within 2 months. On a typical day in April 2020, Google alone blocked 240 million spam messages and 18 million phishing scams. In 2016, banks had reportedly announced a leak of personal information of about 3.2 million debit cards. In 2018, Pune-based Cosmos Bank lost Rs 94 crore in a malware attack. Last year, Kundankulam plant was attacked using malware. What is the need for an updated cybersecurity strategy for India? With the vision of $1 trillion digital component, accounting for one-fifth of the $5 trillion national economy, the importance of cyberspace in India would only keep growing as Indians have taken to mobile broadband like fish to water, driven by affordable tariffs, low-cost smartphones, and a spurt in availability of audio-visual content in Indian languages. Financial services, payment, health services, etc., are all connected to digital mediums, and thanks to Corona, this is expected to increase. CERT-in has recently issued an advisory that there is a threat of massive phishing attack. India was one of the few countries to launch a cybersecurity policy in 2013. Not much has transpired in terms of a coordinated cyber approach. Unlike the US, Singapore, and the UK, where there is a single umbrella organization dealing in cybersecurity, India has 36 different central bodies. Most ministries have their own that deal with cyber issues, and each has a different reporting structure. Each state government has its own CERT. Add to this fact that while the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2020 was to devise a cyber readiness roadmap for organizations and the government for cyber readiness, this is yet to be announced. India is not even a signatory to some of the basic international frameworks on cybersecurity. Like the Convention of Cybercrime of the Council of Europe, which not only European nations but Japan, US, South Africa have become signatories to accept India. Indian laws are not in tandem with the ever changing global cyberspace. The laws are old and hence need to be more dynamic in nature to deal with issues like cyber espionage, data theft, and so on. The Information Technology Act 2000, that is, which is also called as the IT Act of 2000, is the sole law that deals with cyberspace in India. Was passed back in 2000. Also, the cyber law of India has been subject to amendments on various occasions but hasn't served the changing dynamics and the growing threats and manifestation of cyber war. Strategy should conclude the following. Since a global consensus is unlikely any day soon, India should consider joining or leveraging existing frameworks like the Convention on Cybercrime and the Paris Call. After all, cybersecurity has become a geopolitical issue as reiterated time and again by the Prime Minister. Security by design, budgeting by default. It is high time that 10% of every IT budget in the government be earmarked for cybersecurity as recommended by the NASSCOM Cybersecurity Task Force. Just like 1 to 3% of every ministry's budget was set aside for IT in 1998 as recommended by the Prime Minister's IT Task Force in 1998. The National Cybersecurity Strategy 2020 and the Data Protection Framework must be consistent with each other. Exceptions and exemptions must be narrowly crafted in compliance with the principles of lawfulness, fairness, transparency, and proportionality laid down by the Supreme Court in the 2017 privacy judgment. Prevention is better than cure. 9 out of 10 data breaches can be mitigated if we all take care of basic cybersecurity like using licensed and updated software, using different and difficult passwords for different services and devices, multi-factor authentication, and strong encryption. We need innovative solutions to scale up awareness as our user base is expected to reach 1 billion over the next 5 years compared to half a billion currently. Bi-directional partnership, the government should share its own assessment back with the private sector to create incentive for the latter to proactively share their intelligence on threat vectors without jeopardizing contractual obligations or intellectual property. Pragmatic, predictable, flexible underlying principles must go along with the strategic objectives and provide sufficient guidance and flexibility to sector regulators within their respective ecosystem. For example, the cybersecurity guidelines or framework issued by the RBI, SEBI, and all such kind of institutions under the aegis of the Financial Stability and Development Council, thereby bringing greater sanity for the regulators as well as the regulated entities. In addition, every regulation must emerge through public consultation and be backed up with a regulatory impact assessment, whether it is about cross-border data flows or restricting encryption. Now, what are the measures needed? A defense cyber agency is needed, which could be the first step the government plans to for critical infrastructure and military networks that are increasingly becoming dependent on the internet, thus increasing the vulnerabilities. The Defense Cyber Agency will work in coordination with the National Cyber Security Advisor. It will have more than 1,000 experts will be distributed into a number of formations of the Army, Navy, and IAF. According to reports, the new Defense Cyber Agency will have both offensive and defensive capacity. Equally important is the cyber propaganda. During the Doklam conflict, China tried best to unleash cyber propaganda on India and indulged in complex psyops. Because critical cyber infrastructure needs to be defended, and the establishment of the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center is a good step in this direction. Individual ministries and private companies must also put procedures in place to honestly report breaches. It is only then that the NCIPC can provide the requisite tools to secure these networks. This partnership must be transparent and not mirrored in the usual secrecy of intelligence organizations. The upgrading of the Defense Cyber Agency to a cyber command must be, implemented at the soonest. A robust ecosystem must be built to secure India from acts of state and non-state actors, including protocol for grievance redressal in international forums. Better capabilities must be built to detect and deflect attacks. The computer emergency response team must be strengthened and aligned with military and foreign affairs operations. Building a joint task force between the government and key technology players will be crucial. The government should push for the creation of a global charter of the digital human rights. A national gold standard should be created which ensures that Indian hardware and software companies adhere to the highest safety protocols, impart cybercrime investigation training and technological know-how to the various law enforcement agencies. Cyber awareness must be spread and there should be multi-stakeholder approach. Technological inputs, legal inputs, strengthening law enforcement systems, and then dealing with trans-border crime involves a lot of international cooperation. Most of the Indian banking industry and financial institutions have embraced IT to its full potential and optimism and optimization. Reports suggest that cyber attacks are understandably directed towards economic and financial institutions. With innovative technology led programs such as Aadhaar, MyGov, GEM, Digital Locker, that New India is the land of technological prowess and transformation. Government and the private sector jointly have to give cybersecurity some priority in their security and risk management, similar to how it is given for the on land, on air, and on water security management of this country. Science and technology developments and their applications and effects in everyday life, security challenges and their management in border areas, linkages of organized crime with terrorism. By underlining the biosecurity concerns of synthetic biology, analyze India's preparedness in the domains of biosafety and biosecurity. According to the WHO, biosecurity is defined as institutional and personal security measures designed to prevent loss, theft, misuse, diversion, or intentional release of pathogens and toxins. According to FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, biosecurity is a strategic and integrated approach that includes policies and regulations that deal with the risks posed to food safety, animal and plant life, and their health and associated environmental risks. According to WHO, biosafety is the containment principles, technologies, and practices that are implemented to prevent unintentional exposure to pathogens and toxins or their accidental release. India's preparedness, the key ministries tackling biosecurity in India are the Ministries of Health and Family Welfare, Science and Technology, and the Environment Ministry. The various aspects of biosecurity in India are managed by the ICMR, CSIR, and DRDO. Biosecurity is considered as a health and agriculture matter in India, hence it is largely dealt with by the states. The center issues guidelines which the states modify to suit their local needs. In 2004, the National Farmers Commission, headed by M.S. Swaminathan, had recommended the establishment of a National Agricultural Biosecurity Program. In 2013, the Agricultural Biosecurity Bill sought to set up an Agricultural Biosecurity Authority, a high powered body to cover four sectors: animal health, plant health, marine organisms, and agriculturally important microbes. However, this is still waiting for approval. The important import of invasive pests and weeds occurred by the Customs Department. The Plan Quarantine Order of 2003, categorizing species as restricted, prohibited, etc. With respect to their import into India, the categorization under CITES is also adhered to for controlling the species introduction. The ICMR manages several biosafety level labs in India. There are about 30 labs of BSL 3 and BSL 2 plus that are operational. There are about 2 BSL 4 highest safety level labs, one at Pune and the other at Bhopal. India is signatory to Biological and Toxins Weapons Convention of 1972, the first multilateral treaty to ban an entire class of weapons. It has also ratified the treaty. The convention makes use of confidence building measures like consultations among the parties, complaints to the UNSC, assistance to find victims, etc. Now, what are the concerns associated with this? The implementation of biosecurity measures in India is not uniform as it's under the purview of individual states. Now, the fact that India is already susceptible to pest invasions implies that even detecting an act of agroterrorism, let alone tracing its origin, is difficult. The import of potentially invasive pests and biological agents is to be curbed by the customs officials who have been criticized for lacking training in the area. Identification of a potentially invasive species seed among the baggage of incoming travelers. Quarantine officers have been rendered essentially toothless as Destructive Insects and Pests Act of 1914 and Livestock Importation Act of 1898 are only subsidiaries to the Customs Act of 1962. This is one of the aspects the 2013 Biosecurity Bill sought to change. The Biosecurity Bill drafted in India has been pending approval since 2014. Also, it does not take zoonosis like coronavirus into account. Unlike many conventional threats to national security, novel biological agents like the SARS-CoV-2 cannot be effectively anticipated. There is also a significant time lag in coming up with a potent treatment vaccine, which makes the issue even more dangerous. Biological agents like viruses show a higher level of mutations, and there is also the issue of latency period, which impedes the disease detection and control measures. Such biological attacks, intentional or accidental or natural, poses double jeopardy to the defense forces of the country. The armed forces may get affected and weakened by the biological agent, and their capacity to handle the conventional threats of terrorist attacks and WMDs is diluted as resources are diverted for the domestic response, thus posing a security challenge. In light of the discussion and accusations about the role of Wuhan Institute of Virology in the COVID 19 crisis, the challenge of differentiating between offensive and defensive purposes of such biological agents have come to focus and posing a challenge. Even local mismanagement of a biosecurity threat has the potential to expand and cause an effect on international scale. This calls for international level cooperation characterized by transparency, credibility, and timely action. Lack of verification regime under the BTWC, any nation with a developed enough pharmaceutical sector can potentially develop a biological WMD, which makes the framing of a verification regime a difficult task. Development of such a verification regime is further complicated by the consideration that a non state actor may develop a bioweapon. The ability to detect and conclude such non compliances is affected by how quickly an international investigation team is launched and full access to the affected area by the investigation team. Example, the 1981 investigations into an accusation of the US to the Soviets' use of mycotoxins were inconclusive. The COVID 19 crisis has not only affected India and the world nations but also the country of origin. It has shown that every country could become a victim in case of biological war without any victors. The crisis should serve as a reminder of the importance of the doctrine of universal biodeterrence. India, for its part, should strengthen its biosecurity system while mobilizing international cooperation to strengthen the international biosecurity. Now, this is the last topic, General Studies 4. It's about ethics. So, let's read out the question. Moral and ethical values change from time to time along with the advancement in human life. Elucidate with examples. So, values are elements of life that we hold as important or desirable. They are standards of conduct and guide of human behavior. Values give meaning and strength to a person's character by occupying a central place in his life. Values reflect one's personal attitude and judgments, decisions and choices, behavior, and relationships. Values can be relative as well as absolute. These are based on individual and societal standards, their likes, dislikes, social norms, tradition. For instance, Indian traditional values of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, universal brotherhood, tolerance may contradict with Western values of liberalism, individualism, and utilitarianism. Values evolve to bring order in the society and are cultural specific. They evolve along with the cultures. For example, the present generation of the Indian society is more ambition sensitive, showing more assertiveness instead of Indian traditional values of sacrifice and selflessness. The norms of nuclear family and even live in relationships are more socially accepted today. People's People's values tend to change over time as well. Values that suited you as a child change as you become a young adult, which may further change as you become an old person. They change because we want them to, or sometimes they change even if we didn't mean them to. We may have believed that if something is wrong, but now we might not be so sure that it's true. We may have believed that we would never do something, but then we do it and we decide that it's okay to do it. Over a period of time, new ethical issues have arisen and values have changed. New knowledge about existing problems or techniques and completely new areas of work has also led to change in values. There are a series of core values around which most people would agree. However, even those are changing, at least in the intensity. For example, say if we believe that the human life is sacred, but we do not feel the same intensity of this value when judging a terrorist who has killed thousands of innocent people. The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breathes reptiles of mind. English poet William Blake. So, the man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breathes reptiles of the mind. We can often see resistance from parents and society as we are growing up. Our changing values sometimes conflict with our parents' values or our culture's values and leads to this resistance. For example, women working at par with men. Now let's look at the absolute values. Universal values like truth, gratitude, peace, non-violence, sympathy are considered beyond time and space. They are core values and are fundamental. They do not change and remain stable. The standards of conduct differ from person to person, society to society, but care can be some values which can be considered universal. For example, murder is a crime in every society and hence a universal norm. Immanuel Kant considered human dignity as a universal value and one of his categorical imperatives. Similarly, justice for all is an architectonic principle. Over the time, repeated positive engagements of values is likely to strengthen them. Our lives provide continual opportunities for the growth of certain values. Our lives also sometimes put constraints on certain values. Values as such do not change, only their expression changes depending on circumstances and situations. In some cultures, as well as different circumstances, the priorities assigned to values change. We can find values like peace, kindness, hard work, perseverance, etc., still relevant to the same degree as from age old times. They will still remain relevant even after we die. Values are essential to build ourselves. We build ourselves to survive the world and create a society. Since values needed to build a good society are constant or similar, values can be said to be constant, similar, or universal as each of us tries to build a good society. Open your arms to change, but don't let go of your values. The 14th Dalai Lama this tells us that the good values are not supposed to change; they are eternal. Thus, values can be either universal, relative, or dynamic, which keeps changing with time. As Einstein once rightly remarked, try not to become a man of success, but try to become a man of values. Values influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions. They guide us to do the right things. Values give directions and firmness to life. Let's move on to the next topic, the attitude, content, structure, function, and these kind of moral kind of political attitudes. What do you understand by scientific temper and spirit of inquiry? As a responsible citizen of the country, how would you fulfill your fundamental duty to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and spirit of inquiry and reform? Explain. Scientific temper is a type or is a way of thinking and acting which uses a method including observing physical reality, questioning, testing, hypothesizing, analyzing, and communicating. It involves the application of logic and avoidance of bias and preconceived notions in arriving at decisions and becomes particularly valuable while deciding what is best for the community or the nation. Spirit of inquiry is a persistent sense of curiosity that informs both learning and practice. A spirit of inquiry in civil servants engenders innovative thinking and extends possibility for discovering novel solutions in both predictable and unpredictable situations. An individual with spirit of inquiry would raise questions and seek creative approaches to problem solving. A spirit of inquiry suggests to some degree a childlike sense of wonder. Importance of scientific temper and spirit of inquiry. Elements of fairness, equality, and democracy are built in scientific temper. Twin features of internal pluralism and external receptivity has been woven into the development of Indian thought over the ages. This richness of the tradition of argument has shaped India's social world and the nature of Indian culture. It has deeply influenced Indian politics and the development of democracy in India and the emergence of its secular priorities. To weed out the ignorance, example, even literate and well educated people believe in superstitions and follow those. To reduce the intolerance of society, example, killing of rational thinkers such as Dhabolkar and M. Kalburgi. To curb the fake news, rumors, and wrong influence of social media, instead of thinking rationally and researching about something, people blindly follow that what social media propagates. Improve the status of women, issues like temple entry during menstruation, child marriages, triple talaq, which are not based on rational thinking. Scientists are hitting the street because they feel that the climate of scientific inquiry in India is a threat of being compromised by political and religious interference by the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party and associated groups such as Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Scientists are now concerned that instead of ring fencing the Indian scientific community, the government has allowed intrusions that threaten to distract it from areas of research that need the urgent attention of researchers. For instance, the elite Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, has been told by the Ministry of Science and Technology to conduct verifiable scientific research to establish the benefits of, Panchagavya, for example, which is the concoction of cow dung, cow urine, cow milk, curd, and clarified butter that it is used in some traditional Hindu rituals. We are seeing an increasing intrusion of theology into science. The influence of a variety of godmen and miracle makers is increasingly alarming. So, in an age when man has traveled to the moon and returned safely, astrological predictions based on the movements of planets on or the lines of one's palm or the number of alphabets in one's name are widely believed. Food fads, irrational health practices are on the increase. Public culture needed to inculcate scientific temper. In such a situation of social and cultural melee, a major role of scientific temper is to revive confidence and hope and to dispel a fatalistic outlook. The campaign to promote scientific temper must inculcate values like equality and dignity of all human beings, distributive justice, dignity of labor, and social accountability of one's actions. Although big science has served India well, the nation must also look at areas that are less eyeball grabbing, such as water resources, agriculture, and environment, he said, requesting anonymity because he is not allowed to talk to the press. Science and scientists must have a position of pride in society. Even young students need to be motivated into opting for scientific fields. A nationwide science policy which should be able to anticipate problem areas, devise course correction, better funding of science and technology initiatives which would help in developing of the society. All these are essential for bringing about social, economic, and cultural transformation of our country. Scientific temper and spirit of inquiry needs to be promoted across all sections of the society systematically using tools like National Knowledge Network. Public and political understanding of science should be based on evidence and debate with open mind. Article 51A of the Constitution lists the fundamental duties of citizens, which include development of scientific temper, humanism, and spirit of inquiry and reform. It means the Indians must have an open mind to learn new things. So thank you so much for being part of this video. I hope you liked and enjoyed it. Please press the like button and also subscribe to my channel if you would like to me to continue this video series. Thank you so much.